BBC Radio 7.
With scenes that younger listeners particularly may find disturbing, we examine the different types of Ireland's colonists. The largest group were known as Undertakers, whose job it was to clear their estates completely of native Irish inhabitants.
This is a short history of Ireland in 240 episodes. Episode 85, The Plantation of Ulster.
In the year 1608, King James I confiscated virtually all the territory of Ulster west of the River Bann. English and Scots settlers were already busily colonising the counties of Antrim and Down. The lands of County Monaghan had been redistributed in Queen Elizabeth's day.
So, out of the 9 counties of the northern province, that left 6 to be included in the Plantation of Ulster: Armagh, Tyrone, Fermanagh, Cavan, and the counties then named Tyrconnell and Coleraine. This colonising project, as the king explained to his Lord Deputy, would be a civilising enterprise, which would
establish the true religion of Christ among men almost lost in superstition.
Besides, a plantation would quieten Ulster and secure the province against the risk of further native rebellion and foreign invasion.
The first thing to be done was to make a detailed survey of the vast territory to be colonised. To avoid His Majesty's further charge, the decision was made not to attempt to measure the land, but to conduct an inquiry. The traditional Irish local land divisions caused much confusion. The basic units were the townlands, called tates in County Fermanagh, poles in County Cavan, and ballyboes elsewhere. Each townland was supposed to be enough to support one extended family. Small and compact on good land and more extensive in mountainous and boggy areas. Groups of townlands made up larger divisions known as ballybeates and quarters. The commissioners making the inquiry found it all very perplexing. In the end, they decided to make grants based on the ancient land divisions and keeping the Irish names in an anglicised form.
In April 1610, a detailed brochure was published in London. Readers of what became known as the printed book could find out all the terms and conditions of the plantation. The confiscated land of each county was divided into baronies, or precincts, and each precinct was subdivided into large, middle and small estates, or proportions. It soon became clear that separation from the native Irish was the essence of the scheme.
The largest group of colonists, known as Undertakers, had to clear their estates completely of native Irish inhabitants. Undertakers had to be English or inland Scots who had taken the oath of supremacy. That is, they had to be Protestants. Once they'd removed the natives, they had to undertake to colonise their estates with British Protestants. Indeed, it was during the Ulster plantation that the term British came into general use. Officials got tired of constantly saying English, Scots, Welsh and Manxmen. The Undertakers paid annual rent of £5, 6 shillings and 8pence to the king for every 1,000 acres. All in all, they got over a quarter of the confiscated land.
The next group of colonists were known as servitors. They were councillors of state, captains and lieutenants with military commands, and other servants of the crown. Between them, they were assigned about 1/5 of the plantation lands. They didn't have to remove the native Irish, but they enjoyed reduced rents if they brought in British colonists. Their estates weren't just rewards for past service to the crown. The servitors had a key defensive role.
Between 1/4 and 1/5 of the confiscated lands were given out to what were described as the deserving native Irish. This wasn't as generous as it seemed, because a number of these grants were for the lifetime only of those named in them. The leading planters of all categories had to build towns, parish churches, schools and forts. The Church of Ireland received over 1,000 townlands. Trinity College Dublin, founded in the reign of Elizabeth, also got generous grants.
It wasn't long before noblemen, adventurers, gentlemen and courtiers began applying to the king for lands in Ulster. King James wrote a special proclamation for Scotland, urging his original subjects to become planters.
Forasmuch as the north part of the kingdom of Ireland is freed of the former rebellious and disobedient inhabitants thereof, His Majesty has taken a very princely and good course, as well for establishing of religion, justice, and civility, as for planting colonies therein, and distributing of the same bounds to lawful, answerable, and well-affected subjects, upon certain easy, tolerable, and profitable conditions. And although there be no want of great numbers of the country people of England, who, with all gladness, would transport themselves with their families to Ireland, yet His Sacred Majesty, out of unspeakable love toward His Majesty's ancient and native subjects of this kingdom, has been pleased to make choice of them to be partners with His said subjects of England in the distribution aforesaid.
The great migration to Ulster had begun, drawn from every class of British society.
Episode 86. Make speed, get thee to Ulster.
During the summer of 1610, Thomas Blennerhassett and his brother Sir Edward travelled with their families and servants from Norfolk to Ireland. Both of these Englishmen had been granted estates by King James I in the precinct of Lurg in North Fermanagh. They were planters known as Undertakers. That is, they undertook to clear their Ulster estates of the native Irish and to colonise them with loyal Protestants from Britain.
Thomas Blennerhassett was so delighted with his Fermanagh lands that he wrote a pamphlet urging his fellow Englishmen to join him. His main argument was that Ulster had lost most of its population from conflict and famine during the last Great Rebellion. The province's fertile soil was just waiting to be properly farmed by his fellow countrymen.
Fair England, thy flourishing sister, brave Hibernia, commendeth unto thy due consideration her youngest daughter, depopulated Ulster. Despoiled, she present herself in a ragged sable robe. There remaineth nothing but ruins and desolation, with a very little show of any humanity. Fair England, she hath more people than she can well sustain. Goodly Ulster, for want of people, her pleasant fields and rich grounds remain, if not desolate, worse. Make speed, get thee to Ulster, serve God, be sober.
It was widely believed then that England was overpopulated, and it was certainly true that many of the king's Scottish, English and Welsh subjects were eager to get a slice of the action in Ulster. It had been centuries since so much land in Western Europe had been made available for colonization. Much of it was ideal for the grazing of cattle and the cultivation of corn. A rich eel fishery flourished at Tuam, and most of Ulster's rivers swarmed with salmon. Vast numbers were netted, trapped and salted by the native Irish for export to Spain and elsewhere.
Ireland still possessed great forests. Some of the largest were in the 6 counties of the Ulster Plantation, around Lough Erne in South Armagh, and the largest in Glenconkine at the foot of the Sperrin Mountains. Unlike farmland, stands of oak, elm, ash, alder and willow offered a quick return on investment. Once felled and seasoned, wood fetched a good price when split, sawn and shaped into planks for rafters, ship timber and staves, fashioned by coopers into barrels. Branches could be chopped up, piled high and covered with ash, ready to be converted into charcoal for the smelting of iron. By contrast with Ireland, England and Scotland were among the first countries in Europe to have their forests seriously depleted. One Scot bemoaned the loss of trees in his native land.
Ah, what makes now my country look so bare, thus void of planting, woods and forests fair.
As the great migration to Ulster got underway, it was clear that the colonists were drawn from every class of British society. Some were noblemen, like the Earl of Abercorn and the Earl of Ochiltree from Scotland, who responded to a personal appeal from King James to take estates in County Tyrone.
For a countenance and a strength to the rest,
In other words, to give a good example to other planters and to make them feel more secure.
Other colonists were former army commanders, men like Sir Richard Wingfield, who had led the victorious cavalry charge at the Battle of Kinsale, and who was granted the proportion of Benburb in County Tyrone, and the King's Lord Deputy, Sir Arthur Chichester, who got the proportion of Dungannon to add to his vast estates in Inishowen and County Antrim.
All of these planters brought over relatives, neighbours, trusted comrades in arms, stonemasons, carpenters, thatchers, labourers and tenant farmers. At first, the estates granted to Englishmen had colonists who were mostly English. For example, in North Armagh, the Brownlow brothers from Nottinghamshire and other Undertakers from Staffordshire enticed over many of their English tenants. They included families from the Vale of Evesham, who carried over apple tree saplings, ensuring that, in time, Armagh would be known as the Orchard County.
No fewer than 4 members of the Cunningham family from Wigtonshire got estates in County Donegal. Virtually all of the families they persuaded to join them were from this southwestern corner of Scotland. Indeed, most of the Scots, judging by their surnames, came from Ayrshire, Wigtonshire, Clydeside, Lanark, Renfrew, Stirlingshire and the Borders.
The English colonists had more capital, but the Scots were the most determined. Sir William Alexander observed,
Scotland, by reason of her populousness, being constrained to disburden herself, like the painful bees, did every year send forth swarms.
But some parts of Ulster were not attracting swarms of planters, so King James now turned to the city of London.
Dr. Jonathan Barden wrote A Short History of Ireland, and in it you heard Francis Tumulty, James Green and Richard Dormer. It was produced by Alison Finch.